In 1999, a green card holder, or lawful permanent resident, named Jose Segovia Benitez joined the U.S. Marine Corps. Jose was born in El Salvador and brought to the United States as a toddler, where he grew up in Long Beach, California. He served 5 years on active duty, including 2 combat tours in Iraq. During his service, he sustained a brain injury and developed severe PTSD. He was honorably discharged in 2004 at the rank of corporal. Like many veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan era, Jose returned to a civilian world that wasn't equipped to handle his injury. He struggled with memory loss, emotional dysregulation, and substance abuse, all common symptoms when combat trauma goes untreated. Over the next decade, his self-medication led to a series of run-ins with the law, DUI convictions, narcotic possessions, and a conviction for domestic violence. In a standard criminal court, Jose served his time. However, for a non-citizen, these convictions, specifically the 2011 domestic violence charge, classified as an aggravated felony under the 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, referred within the immigration law community as IRA-IRA. Under IRA-IRA, an aggravated felony conviction triggers mandatory deportation. It strips immigration judges of their judicial discretion, meaning the judge couldn't take into account his 2 tours in Iraq, his injury, or even his honorable discharge. In January 2019, under the zero-tolerance enforcement priorities of the time, ICE agents picked Jose up and deported him to El Salvador. He was dropped in a country he hadn't seen in nearly 40 years, where he had no family and no access to the Veterans Affairs medical care he required for his brain injury. We like to think of our legal system as a series of distinct silos. Criminal laws over here, civil laws over there, and immigration law is a separate beast entirely, a matter of paperwork, visas, and distant borders. But if you look closer, the walls between these compartments are crumbling. Today, the line between a criminal courtroom and an immigration hearing is thinner than it has ever been. We are living in the area of crimmigration, where a single misdemeanor can carry the weight of a life sentence of exile, and where the administrative stroke of a pen in Washington, D.C. can fundamentally change how a local police officer interacts with a neighbor on the street. Between the shifting mandates of ICE and the pendulum swing of administration policies, the American dream is being litigated in real time, often in the shadows of a system that is as overwhelmed as it is complex. It isn't just about who gets in. It's about how we treat those who are already here, and what happens when the power of the state meets the vulnerability of the individual. Welcome to Lens of a Lawyer, the podcast that examines life and the American experiment through the prism of the criminal justice system. We've been on a short hiatus, and we are now back for Season 2. To discuss immigration law and its evolving interactions with criminal law, I am honored to welcome Rekha Sharma-Crawford, this episode's guest. A high-profile immigration attorney, widely recognized for expertise in federal court litigation, Rekha has become a leading national voice in challenging the government's application of immigration statutes, particularly concerning the due process rights of non-citizens. Rekha, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, David.
You know, interesting, I know you started your career as a prosecutor rather than going straight into immigration, and I'm wondering why you didn't go straight to immigration.
You know, it's funny. I never thought I was going to do immigration work. I always thought I was going to be a career prosecutor. I wanted to be able to do trial work, and I honestly believed that in the criminal justice system, the prosecution was supposed to be the guardrails for due process, for justice, that if a case didn't meet the elements, you didn't charge it. You held all the power. But you know what happens is when you're an immigrant, people always ask you immigration questions. Right. So I was in a situation where I had left the DA's office and was looking for the next chapter of my life, and it turned out that all I got was immigration questions. So I thought I better learn how to do it. And when I did go and find out what immigration court looks like and what the immigration system looks like, I was appalled.
Did your family's background have a part to play in your profession in not choosing immigration to begin with?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, when you're an immigrant, everybody assumes you're going to do immigration law. And I was like, and I really didn't want to be a part of that assumption. And so it was just not anything I wanted to do. And I also, I'm probably aging myself, but grew up on LA law. Yeah. And the prosecutor, the gal that used to play the prosecutor, that's what I wanted to do. And it was funny because she used to give great closings. And that's what I learned how to do, was give great closings.
You know, it's funny, I remember LA law too, and I remember that inspiring me as well. Yeah. You know, I'm wondering, you and I worked together before in criminal law and immigration law. Me doing the criminal and you obviously doing the immigration. And I sometimes take it for granted that people don't understand the difference between the two And I was wondering if you could kind of talk briefly on the major differences between criminal law and immigration law.
Due process still exists in the criminal courts. People don't understand that immigration is a civil piece of law. It is not criminal at all. You would never know that because of the language and the nomenclature that gets associated with it, right? They're called criminals. They use things like arrests and warrants and detention and jail and bond. So all of that terminology, all of that vocabulary is borrowed from the criminal justice system. And yet it's a civil process. It has no right to counsel, for example. It has an administrative hearing, not an actual court through the justice system. It has no right to a jury trial. So some of those fundamental things that we associate with regular courts doesn't really exist in the immigration system.
I know with due process, I never really understood the meaning of it until I was standing in criminal court and my client wasn't getting it. And I was like, all right, now I understand. But just so our listeners understand, in the immigration system, it's as if a police department established its own court of employees that are employees of the police department to review the activities of the police department against other individuals. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, it's very incestuous.
So walk me through that, why it's so different than in the criminal justice system. When a police officer, a prosecutor wants to impact my client's rights, they can't do that on their own. They may be initially on a 24-hour hold. They can take their freedom briefly. But ultimately, if they really want to go after someone, they've got to go to a separate branch of the government, the court system, judicial branch, and say, hey, judge, we think we've satisfied whatever elements it is, whatever standard of law to impact this person's rights. And then the court or the judge or a jury has to agree. And then at that point, they can impact the rights. In your area of the world, the immigration world, it's a little bit different, or a lot of it different. I wonder if you could just talk about that.
So it's really fascinating because immigration initially, when you go back in history, it used to be part of the Department of Labor. And then what they did is subsequently, they put it all under the INS long time ago, before September 11th. It was all under the Immigration and Naturalization Service. That was true for the courts, for the enforcement side, as well as the benefit sides of immigration. And at the time, the judge system used to be under the Department of Justice. Now, the Department of Justice still is, in fact, part of the immigration process. But after the Homeland Security Act, what they did is they divided up USCIS and ICE, right? And they put them both under the Department of Homeland Security. So in appearances, you would think Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, all separate. But because they're all part of the executive branch, there's very little separate. There's more overlap. And so what you now see happen is that the Department of Justice, again, kind of puts forth this visual that says you have this court of law, but it's not. It's an administrative civil process.
And the judge is, and I'm using those kind of air quotes, not to disrespect the individuals making the decisions, but those judges are hired by and fired by and paid by whom?
The Department of Justice.
And so if they don't like the decisions, then they can...
So that happens all the time. And it's not really disrespectful. The agency itself seems to kind of take this idea that these immigration judges are nothing more than hearing officers, and even more so, they are, as the administration itself has kind of classified them, low-level employees. Right? So, I mean, it's the disrespect that isn't just something that you're putting out. It's what the agency itself is putting out. And what that does is it tells them that you are nothing more than a political entity. So do as we say, otherwise you're out of a job. And that's really what you're kind of seeing happening across the country now with these firings of immigration judges across the courts.
So if they want to kind of increase the amount of removals, deportations, denial of some type of benefit to individuals that are here, that want to stay here, if someone in a higher political position wants to turn the knob to get rid of more people, they can directly do that?
That's what's happening now, right? We're seeing it in real time.
So how does that happen? Do they call up the immigration judge and say, hey, I need you to start increasing your percentages? I mean, how would that physically happen?
Yeah, I mean, the Attorney General will say, we're watching you. And we know that this happened during the first Trump administration because there were actual quota dials that were showing up on judges' computer screens to make sure that they were doing cases in the allotted amount of time, that they were not granting more than they were denying. So some of that physical appearance of that quota system was in place. What you're seeing now is that they are not only is the Attorney General telling them, you will deport more, you will deny more. What we've seen now happen is that veil between DHS and DOJ has dissolved altogether, which is where you're seeing currently in the no bond policy that has happened, right? A policy where they overturned 30 years of interpretation of law to say someone who is now in the interior of the United States is no longer eligible for bond or release while their removal case is ongoing. That policy was crafted with DHS and DOJ sitting at the same table. So, I mean, think of that from a layperson's perspective, that the judge and the prosecutor are sitting in the back room cutting a deal and saying, this is how we're going to handle cases. You would never put up with that in the criminal justice system. You wouldn't even put up with that in a civil system, which is about torts and family law and other types of legal process that is civil in nature. You still wouldn't see that happening either.
Yeah, that definitely violates certainly my idea of fundamental fairness, and that kind of certainly brings up with me some emotion. And I know this kind of area of the law, there's a lot of emotion. On the one hand, I see images of families being ripped apart. It angers me. I get emotional. I'm always drawn towards, I think, the kind of the underdog. At the same time, I know the other side of the equation is certainly gets emotionally involved in when someone who doesn't have status commits a crime, even though I realize there's millions of people that are committing crimes that have status, but there's all this emotion on either side and we're hollering at each other. I'm wondering from from an expert standpoint, if we pushed aside all that emotion and I said, Rekha, what I want to do is I want to make a decision on my own without emotion for a second. Could you explain the situation, the immigration system, without the emotion that's in there we're talking about right now, so that any of us listening, myself included, could make a reasoned decision on what the problems are and what the potential solutions are?
Yeah, so if you think about ways first of all, let's back up. If you think about how much control over where you were physically born.
Zero, yeah.
Right, you have no control over that. So start with that. Then you say, okay, even with that premise, if you look at the nature of organized society and the fact that separate sovereigns have a right to govern themselves, right? We can all agree to that. And that there should be an orderly process. If someone wants to come to the United States, what does that process look like? Is it orderly? Normally, there are certain processes, for example, a family-based process where you can ask for certain family members to come and live and work here. Employment-based, certain employers can sponsor certain individuals to come and work in the United States. Humanitarian-based, those are things that, if there are certainly places in the world that are dangerous, there are places in the world that people are desperate and they're going to leave because it's a matter of life and death, all right? Those humanitarian-based processes exist. Now, when you look at those three processes, and you think about, okay, well, if those worked in an orderly way, why would someone try and do something in a disorderly way? And the problem is that it is the breakdown of the orderly system that then results in people who are engaged in disorderly conduct because they don't see any other solution.
So give me an example of what you mean by someone not willing to go the orderly way and is going to take a disorderly way around it.
So think about family members, right? So if you think about someone who is a green card holder, and you say to that person that you are married, but your spouse that you married after you got your green card, you and your spouse have to be apart for at least 3 to 5 years. That person's going to say, wait, what do you mean? Right? All of a sudden, what should be orderly feels disorderly because you now are placed in the situation of, well, then maybe I'll go back home and wait with that person. Well, the minute you make that decision, you risk losing your green card.
So wait, so if I get a green card here in the United States and then I get married to someone who's not a citizen, who doesn't have status,
Correct.
I may have to be apart from them for 3 to 5 years before that spouse can come to the United States lawfully?
Yes.
And so now you're saying I have to make a decision now between what? I guess between staying here and maybe not marrying, or saying I can't see it for 3 to 5 years, or leaving, at which point I lose potentially the green card. I see.
So then the only other option you have is having a long distance relationship for an unknown period of time. I'm saying 3 years, 5 years. What if it's more? Right? What you're seeing right now is a pause on adjudication of applications. So now 3 years becomes 5 years. 5 years becomes 7 years. How long do you leave your life in limbo?
I see.
Right? So that breakdown of a system that should be orderly is now going to result in making difficult life choices that normal people don't want to have to make. Right? Think about even a citizen. You marry someone who is outside of the country.
Sure.
Right? And you think about just, let's say you're on vacation in Europe, you fall in love and you say, okay, I want to get married. Again, you're put under those similar kinds of things. People assume, well, just because they're a citizen, they can get married and everything's okay. That's not necessarily true. In fact, the Supreme Court herself has said that you have the right to marry, but you don't have the right to guarantee that your loved one's going to live in the United States. Right?
But so what do we do? I mean, I hear of the millions of people waiting for something. I don't know what that means. Millions of people have requested some type of relief or trying to adjust status to be able to be in the country lawfully. I don't know how you deal with a million of anything. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, what answer do I come up with now, or what are some things you could help me with in helping to understand what we can think of doing now? And maybe there's nothing to do immediately, but certainly in a process to help get through the backlog, I guess, if there is millions of people in some backlog, but also dealing with it in the future so that we don't create the same backlog again.
I mean, part of what you saw is that back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan, who was the true architect of the only amnesty in recent times, right? Everybody else wants to say this is amnesty, that is amnesty. Those are not really true. The true last amnesty occurred under Ronald Reagan. But what he had suggested was, look, most of the time, people come looking for a better life. That's what they come to do. At the time, the undocumented population, what his solution is look, if you take the number of people who are undocumented and legalize them, and then create an incentive to where employers don't hire undocumented individuals by punishing employers, not the worker, then you de-incentivize people trying to come in and look for work because they don't have a way to get work. Again, try to kind of reset the orderly boundaries to say, okay, let's deal with who's here, and then put guardrails in place that would prevent these backlogs from occurring again.
Okay.
They didn't enforce the law against the employer. Why? Because the employer is the one that votes. The non-citizen doesn't vote.
Right, they can't.
They can't.
Right.
So in order to address the congressional problem and the political issues at play, the law was there, the process was there. They just didn't follow through with it. So you can't do that and then turn around and say, we've created the same problem again.
So Reagan essentially said, all right, we're going to do a reset. We're going to offer amnesty to anyone here who's here without status, probably subject to certain conditions. But generally speaking, if you're here without status, we're going to offer amnesty and a roadmap to having status, or roadmap to citizenship.
That's right.
But we're going to put in laws that are going to enforce against employers who are otherwise hiring people without status.
Right.
That will essentially cut off the demand for labor that is not that doesn't have status. But what you're saying happened is that they did the amnesty part, but they never went after and enforced it against the employers, because the employer's like, wait a minute, don't enforce it against us, I guess. Go somewhere else. And so what happened is they went and started enforcing against the undocumented persons that are here,
right,
which of course have no ability to change anything from a systemic point of view.
Right, and think about that. So it's kind of the same thing that you probably see. It's the drug problem, right? They go after the street level person,
right,
without really going after the criminal organization, right? So have we solved the drug problem?
No, we're still.
It's the same thing, right? I mean, people are always going to come trying to make a better life. So that demand for cheap labor, until you satisfy that, until you address that, you're never going to solve that problem.
So how do you do that? Is it through the E-Verify program? I mean, how do you go after employers and enforce?
I mean, that was the original genesis of the I-9 process, is they said, okay, on this I-9, we're going to ask employers to verify. Remember, it was never designed for the employee to verify. It's an employer verification.
I see.
Right, by its nature. And so what the employer is supposed to do is to verify this individual has lawful authority to work in the United States. Here's how they have lawful authority to work in the United States. And then they sign it. And so when they would do these workplace enforcement raids or whatever, they were like, yeah, employer, give us the I-9 form.
Right.
And then if there was a signature on there, then they would go after the employer to say, wait, you verified that this was accurate. Right?
Right.
That's not what they did, though. They went after the person who was the employee for false documents, for false information, for identity theft, like all of these other things, where really all you were doing is dealing with the street level stuff. You weren't really dealing with the upper level.
But how would I guess, I filled out, I'm sure, an employment application when I started my law firm in 2007, when I started working there. How do you verify that I am a citizen? You know what I mean? Like, I had a driver's license. I probably had to give a social security card if I remember, but is there a database? I mean, I don't even know where you go to say is David Bell a U.S. citizen.
But that's where that E-Verify system came from, too, right? I mean,
so that does do that?
Yeah, it checks your social security numbers, right?
I see.
But the reality of it is it's pretty flagrant, right? I mean, if you look at certain industries in the United States,
sure,
you and I can agree that the chance that someone in that industry is undocumented is pretty high. But what does the employer say? The employer says, yeah, but if I have to pay $20 an hour or I can pay $12, why would I pay $20?
That's right. No.
Right? And so it perpetuates this condition where the employer is hungry for the cheap labor. And the cheap labor will come because they're hungry for a better life.
What do many Americans not understand about the immigration system that you think would be important for them to be able to make informed decisions on the issue? I know we've talked about a few. Is there anything else?
I mean, I think they need to understand that the system, when advocates say that the system is broken, right? People are seeing it now. I mean, this outrage against, the defund ICE movement, the abolish ICE movement. This is not a new movement. Advocates have been saying this for how long? Right? The difference is they're now watching it in real time be used against U.S. citizens. And for the first time, U.S. citizens are saying, wait, that's not right. And advocates are saying, yes, but it was okay as long as it wasn't targeted at you. Now that it's targeted at you, you're going to say, wait, that's not right.
It's interesting. Well, a theme of this show, maybe unintended or not, is kind of empathy. And it seems like until something happens to you, not you personally, Rekha, but to me, I'm not going to fully get it, right? And that's what you're saying is going on here. But how is that? So what are you saying? Why is that something to better understand that would help individuals in making informed choices on what to do?
Because I'm back to the idea of, when you think about someone who's here, maybe the starting point isn't always to say they came across illegally and therefore. I mean, yes. But the question is why? Why are they here? Right? And is there a systematic issue at play? Are they a loved one of a green card holder who said, I don't want to sit here for 5 years without my loved one? Would you? No, right? Yeah. Would you leave behind your child who is, 20 years old or 21 years old? And you go, well, yeah, but they're an adult. Are they? I mean,
I didn't become an adult until like 46, so I'm just.
The reality of it is that those are tough choices, right? Those are tough choices, and so I think it is about being empathetic, but it's also about not just taking the narrative for its face value. And I think too many people do that right now. Is they just say, let's take the narrative for what it is, right? That's how we ended up with these sound bites of, why don't they get legal? Or why didn't they do it the right way? Okay, what is the right way? Well, I don't know what that is, but why didn't they do it the right way? And I think that's the breakdown is that what people are waking up to right now is to go, wow, this system really is a mess. Like in what universe does the judge and the prosecutor sit in the same room and come up with a solution and say, yeah, we've already talked about it. Now here's what you're going to take because that's what we're going to give you. It doesn't happen, right? That level of understanding to do more than just take the 30-second soundbite, I think that's a great starting point. What makes it hard now, though, is there's so much misinformation out there. And people truly, truly don't know how to tell what's right from what's not right.
When I was looking to interview you and kind of coming up with questions, I recalled questions that I've seen on applications for status that I thought were somewhat fascinating, and especially in terms of the interaction of immigration and criminal. And the question on at least two forms, one was for the green card and one for citizenship, the question is approximately the same. Have you ever committed a crime for which you have not been arrested? Which is such a weird question to me, because if you were to ask me that now, I mean, on the one hand, I have the right to remain silent from a criminal standpoint. From an immigration standpoint, I guess you kind of don't. And I've seen this question being used to strip green card holders of citizenship when they're later charged and found guilty of a crime that was committed before they answered that question. And on the one hand, we believe that kind of everyone we arrest for a crime in the U.S. has a right to remain silent, but yet it looks like we're entrapping immigrants by making them choose between incriminating themselves by admission and incriminating themselves by omission. And is this something you've encountered with your work?
100%. We in the context of immigration work call that the gotcha question, right? Because when does it come up? I mean, think about, have you ever left the house without your driver's license in your pocket? I mean, it's a crime. Technically, that's a crime. It's a misdemeanor in most jurisdictions, right? And so if I answer no, and then they later find out that I had a ticket for driving without my driver's license without my license in my possession, you could come back and say, well, you answered no, but the answer is yes. And so part of this is we call this the gotcha question for a reason, and that is that it is often used as a ad hoc reasoning for trying to go after someone to either take away their green card or to say, now you want to naturalize, and therefore we are now going to make it more difficult for some other reason. Like, for example, what you're seeing right now in the United States is people exercising their First Amendment, right? And if that speech is not acceptable to a way that the administration prefers, then they're using this question now to go back and say, well, wait a minute, did you ever have anything in your background or history or anything else that we can use that violates, that would have somehow been implicated under that question? And you're seeing that happen.
What's interesting about that is that it's almost as if the question is intended not to satisfy some standard at the moment the question is asked, but rather as to kind of develop an additional weapon in the future to be used on a discretionary capacity against a person if somebody on the executive branch wants to.
100%. But you see it over and over again. In immigration court, for example, they'll let in police reports. Yeah. Right? Now, even the courts have found that police reports are inherently unreliable because it's not the whole picture, right? A police report is designed to be the aid of the police officer in whether they recall certain events, they don't. I mean, it's not 100% of the entire thing.
Right. And
so there may be facts that are not in the police report.
Absolutely.
That the police officer, if they testified, would be able to testify to. Well, in immigration court proceedings, they submit the police report as the Holy Grail. And then the problem becomes is that if the individual is questioned on those police reports, what do? Do they answer? Do they not answer? Do they invoke the Fifth Amendment? Do they not invoke the Fifth? Like it's a lose-lose proposition for them, right? Because if they invoke, that is taken as a negative inference.
Because it's a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding.
I see. Right. If they don't invoke and they say things, then you as a criminal defense attorney are going to be like, what the heck were you doing?
Yeah.
right? So it is that gotcha kind of system that is inherently, and time again, you'll see it in the immigration system, where it feels more like we're not really trying to make sure that you are right by the law. We're trying to set off enough landmines that hopefully somehow you trip one.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's almost like I guess if you were to ask me to design one, certainly at least we want the best and the brightest, the individuals that want to be here, that want to work hard, that these are all positive qualities that we would set out as kind of criteria. But rather than focusing on that, we're using these gotcha questions to weed out people that have run afoul of something. But we've all run afoul of something. I probably broke a few laws driving over here today. Right.
And, think about it in terms of code enforcement, because immigration is code enforcement, right? Just like too many cars in your yard, or your grass is too long. Those are code enforcement issues. Now, if you think about the objective of code enforcement, what is the objective of code enforcement? Compliance. It's not punitive, it's compliance, right? So if you have too many cars in your yard, what do they want you to do? Move the cars, right? They aren't necessarily going to put you in jail because you have too many cars. They really just want you to move the cars, right? So if you think about immigration as code enforcement, the goal should be to try and bring them right with the law. Not these gotcha questions that say, how can we find ways to punish you? How can we find ways to detain you? How can we keep you in custody for months on end on a civil violation? But yet that's how the system works.
Well, and I know in working with you, certainly, Rick, or at least watching you work, it's up to individuals like you to bring forth all the positive qualities of the client you represent, when in fact, it almost seems like the government should be doing that. Right? If the government's interest is to, whatever the immigration policy is, certainly it's to get people that want to be here, that want to work hard, that want to contribute to society, it seems like almost the government would be responsible for identifying that and pushing that. But the impression I get is the government identifies all the things someone's done wrong, all the reasons they shouldn't be here, all the reasons they should leave, and you have to come forward and dig up and present to the court, or this immigration court, or to the government, why the government's wrong in their initial kind of assumption.
Yeah, this is kind of how I ended up doing this work, right? Because it offended me as a former prosecutor. As a former prosecutor, you hear the state always say the burden of proof is on the prosecution, as it should be. Right? Because we are trying to take away an individual's liberty. We are trying to take away a person's ability to be with their family and their loved ones based on criminal conduct. But really, it is a deprivation of liberty, and therefore the state should bear the burden. You hear prosecutors say that. If I cannot prove each and every element of the offense, then find the individual not guilty, right? Here, what you see is the government has all the power. They hold all the cards, and then they cheat. I find that deeply offensive, right? From a prior law enforcement background position, to say that's not how that system should work. If you are a government attorney, it was pounded into my head as a baby prosecutor that you have an ethical duty to act in a way that is higher than anybody else because you hold all the power, right? What you're seeing here is that, for example, this no bond policy, the fact that they're going in and arguing things that are completely contrary to 30 years of how law has been interpreted, the fact that the Department of Justice is telling government lawyers to violate federal court orders, I find that just troubling as hell. To go, I don't get it. Like, if that is not the guardrails coming down, then what is? Right?
And I know in the bond situation on the criminal side, when I've represented individuals that potentially could have an ICE hold, or maybe there's a potential immigration consequence from the work that I'm doing, the government will sometimes, on the prosecutor's side, will stand up and say, Judge, they're a flight risk. They have family in Mexico. They have family somewhere else. They're not citizens here. And my argument to this day still remains the same. Judge, in this courtroom, there's one person here I know that really, really wants to be here, beyond all other people in here, and that's my client. How much they've struggled to be here, to stay here, potentially to live in the shadows. It seems almost backwards in the position. Hey, I want to switch a little bit, a nuanced approach, and an argument that I've heard, and I'm debating in my mind. I want to hit you with it. The argument I've heard is that we have certain rights in our society, like due process, but if you illegally insert yourself into that society, you're not automatically extended these rights. And the root of that argument, to the extent I can understand it, is kind of logistics. It's very hard to tackle mass immigrations with long and costly proceedings for each case, and also in a perception of fairness. If you want to enjoy the protection of our laws, you cannot subvert them to gain access to that protection. How do you answer that argument?
Well, I would tell you that the Fifth Amendment talks in terms of persons. It does not talk in terms of citizenship, right? And the Supreme Court has a long history of saying that if you are in the interior of the United States, you are entitled to those protections. And so as a starting point, I think once the individual is here, then at that point, the individual does, under the United States Constitution, have those rights of due process. And, I think that's a term that you and I as lawyers will throw around due process as this and do. Most people think of due process and go, it's this, abstract idea of due process. And in reality, what I tell folks is it's your day in court. It's your right to be heard. It's your opportunity to be heard and to present your side of the case. Why would we not give people that opportunity? Why is that not at the heart of fundamental fairness?
And let me take be devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
There's only a finite number of resources in the United States, whatever that resources constitute. And at the one time, we have the millions of people that are in this system, however it came about. And giving due process to all those individuals, there's a certain cost to it. And at the same time, healthcare is an issue in the United States for individuals lawfully here. Education's an issue. Childcare is an issue. There's an infinite number of issues going on. And it's the allocation of those resources, I think, that might be at the base of that argument. I mean, how do you respond to that? I understand the Fifth Amendment says persons, but at the same time, there's a realistic, I guess, a frustration potentially that how is it that you say you want to avail yourself of the laws of the United States, but you don't want to follow the very law that gets you into the United States? I'm still struggling with that, Rekha.
No, I get that, and I understand. But the issue is that there are different protections for recent arrivals versus those who've been here a long time, right? It's kind of like I said, is that the historical enforcement process has been, if you're not a criminal, we're going to leave you alone.
Okay.
Then aren't you also part of what allowed them to stay and be here and build a life?
Oh, interesting. Almost detrimental reliance. You've relied on this past policy. You're here, you made a life, you bought a house, you have a job, whatever it is.
Right. And so the question is that, and this is not one president or another, right? You can go back decades where people have, and if you ask law enforcement, historically what they will tell you is if you were not a criminal, if they ran across you and you were not a criminal, they didn't want to waste their resources on you. They were going to go do other things, right? So in that way, didn't they allow you to build your life? And so now that you've built your life and you are now, for whatever reason, policy shifts or otherwise, are now placed in a situation of being able to take advantage of those limited opportunities found in the statute, in the law that says there are certain forms of relief defenses, if you will, from removal, then shouldn't we give you those opportunities? If Congress didn't want to have any opportunities, if they said it doesn't matter if you've been here 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, it doesn't matter, then why create those opportunities to begin with, right? So in some ways, I think there is an element to say, look, is there ever going to be a perfect law? No. But do we all agree that right now it needs to be written? Yes. But even still, there are still, just from a humanity perspective, this idea that says, if Congress themselves have said, if you've been here for 10 years and you get put in removal proceedings, that the law allows you to make your case, then shouldn't we allow you to make your case rather than strip you of that ability without any kind of process at all?
And I think going back to that Fifth Amendment you brought up, this idea of the Fifth Amendment uses the word persons. And it is always a scary thing in the criminal justice system, and I think in the immigration system, when we start to play with that definition. Because as soon as we start defining people outside of that term, really, really, really terrible things can happen, particularly when the definition of person or the definition of what's not a person or who's not a person can be decided by executive branch, the police, the prosecutors, immigration, without any judicial oversight. And I'm concerned kind of that's what potentially is happening. And I was wondering, and I never thought of this until you and I talked before, but an argument from a pro-immigration activist that comes up is that immigrants and immigration serve as an easy target to get the American public used to the authoritative practices of the executive branch. And that's not something I ever really thought about, but I know this was mostly discussed in the context of federal agencies like ICE in Minneapolis or the National Guard deployed in California, handling both immigrant communities and protesters. And I'm wondering if you can explain how that extends to immigration policies that you deal with, evictions, legal protections, etc. It's almost as if the immigration community stands as a testing ground for a more overreaching, I would say, robust in a bad way, executive branch. If you could talk a little bit about that.
We're watching it happen now. I mean, think about what started. You had cases where people who were protesting on university campuses, right, got targeted.
Yeah.
And then they went after the universities and said, stop teaching these things, stop being these liberal, right? So now we're going to control what universities teach, right? You saw the crackdown on the First Amendment for the non-citizen first. And now what do you have? Well, we should fire Jimmy Kimmel. We should fire the comedian. We should fire that comedian, right? That is now a infiltration into modern American life that says, we are now going to make it okay that if you say things that are previously protected under the First Amendment and we don't like them, then by God, we're going to target you.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it play out, right? If you think about that, think about the warrantless arrest. They said, well, ICE doesn't need a warrant to go in your house. There was a flash in time right after Minnesota where they said, we're going to go into people's houses with our little administrative warrant. Right. Where does that lead to? Where does that slippery slope go? And I think some of these policies that you're seeing, they get tested on immigrant communities to see how far can we do this? Think about the birthright citizenship case, right? People were astonished that right out of the block, the administration went after birthright citizenship.
And just to be clear, the birthright citizenship is if you're born on U.S. soil, essentially, you're automatically a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
Okay, and the administration is saying that that's not what was meant in the 14th Amendment.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And really, I mean, that's a more nuanced argument.
Right.
But for purposes of my example, nobody thought that was going to be the first opening salvo of the administration. And everybody went, well, why would you do that? Right? And in reality, what it was designed to do was never about the first go round of it. I think this second go round is a different question. But the initial legal challenge to birthright citizenship was in the vehicle of the nationwide injunction, right? That was the question that went to the Supreme Court, whether or not a single judge could prohibit certain executive action through a nationwide injunction. When they took that down and they said that a nationwide injunction was no longer a viable vehicle to prevent executive overreach, I mean, think about all the other things that can apply to. It's not just immigration. It could be any policy that would be overreaching, whether it's in the environmental area or reproductive rights or anything else, right, that involves a nationwide injunction over a policy. You take down the nationwide injunction, you're back to now class actions or certain other vehicles that are legal vehicles. But it was used in a way that everybody knew that the question of birthright citizenship was, no matter how it got handled, there was going to be an appeal. So it was the fastest way to get it to the Supreme Court to address the issue of the nationwide injunction. It's very Machiavellian. And I think that's the piece people don't understand is that you can use some of these other vehicles to force an issue that has a far broader, wider reach. And that if we are not careful, that is what's going to happen. It's the fastest way to take down the guardrails, and that's what happened in that instance.
And the other thing I'm seeing amongst friends of mine, colleagues and things that are either first generation or second generation immigrant, there is a fear there where I've had families, friends of mine we go to school with, whatever our child goes to school with, tell me that they are having their children, when they travel and themselves, with their passport, with even inside the country, documentation proving their citizenship, even though they either were born here, they were citizens from birth, or maybe they're, there was no question. It's not even an issue as to citizenship, but there's an underlying fear there. And I think it's also something that gets lost. I've certainly seen with my clients that maybe their status is up in the air because of a criminal case that I've got with them. The amount of stress and anxiety and fear takes such an awesome toll, and I'm not sure how to even quantify it. I can see it in friends and family and clients. I can't even begin to quantify the loss in enjoyment of life, the loss in productivity, the loss in anything we hold of true and of value in our society. It just kind of dissipates and erodes in this kind of, this negative light. I don't know if you see that too, and I don't know if is there a way to capture that?
It's funny that you say that, because there's been, the administration has said openly that they're going to come after immigration attorneys. And that is their goal. That is part of their goal. And they're going to use, whether it's the ethics, the disciplinary advisor per the state, whether that they're going to use that as a way to do it, whether they're going to use criminal charges to do it. For the longest time, attorneys were terrified that immigration attorneys were terrified that the administration was going to somehow try and use the criminal justice system to come after attorneys for doing our job, just doing our job.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you say that, because, I'm a U.S. citizen. And yet every time we leave the country, I say to my husband, I don't know if they're going to let me in.
Wow.
I don't know if we're going to, and it's a standing joke right now for us, because we say, we're aggressive, we are loud, we are vocal, we're out there, we're, in the media, those kinds of things. And the reality of it is that, do we believe we have a target on our back? Yeah, sometimes we do. I'm actively involved with the National Bar Association. So it's clear that I'm putting myself out there. And so the question becomes is that at what point do they say, we're not letting you in because you exercised your First Amendment, because you were too visible, because you were saying things that were against the administration's policies. So, imagine if I have that feeling.
Sure.
What does the average person who doesn't necessarily fully understand the legal systems and the legal processes, what do they go through on a regular basis?
Yeah, it would be heart stopping. And in particular, I have individuals that will come to me and say, well, if the executive branch, the police don't act properly, I'll go to court. I'll go to trial. I'll go to whatever. I say, well, wait a minute here. You will suffer during that period of time, financially, emotionally, mental health wise, during that period of time. And so when the executive branch kind of acts out, and however they decide to, whatever administration, in a way that forces individuals to go to court to kind of rectify the situation because of an overreach, that has tremendous consequences as well.
Think of it like this, David. If you've ever been driving down the road and a police car pulls up behind you, you're automatically angry. You've done nothing wrong.
Right.
You're like, I'm going the speed limit, I'm doing all the things, but your heart rate increases automatically just because they're back there.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine that times 1,000. Right? And so, the stress is real. The anxiety is real. Immigrant communities are terrified. They don't know if, a loved one doesn't come home from work because they worked late or did something go horribly wrong. That level of stress it's not sustainable.
No.
And I think that's what the administration is counting on, because when people give up, or they have just had a level of stress that is no longer sustainable, then they leave. And so, if you can't meet the numbers, or 1 million, deportations or whatever, you do it by any means possible. Sometimes it's through enforcement. Sometimes it's just by psychological warfare.
Oh my gosh, we're going to cause so much pain that at the end people just leave.
Right.
More suffering. I don't think the world needs more suffering. I would say.
I think we are in a situation where not only does the world not need more suffering, but I think the normalization of that suffering is what we're watching in real time, right? The erosion of human dignity. Think about just if you listen to a press conference right now, right? And you think about when a reporter asks a question and all of a sudden that reporter is now the target as opposed to just letting them do their job. We are desensitizing the human experience to a level to say, you are not human. I can talk to you any way I want to, right? I think we saw parts of that when you saw people go after each other on social media without, from the back of a screen and the back of a screen name. You started to see that erosion. And now you see it when you have press conferences or other things where people will just openly say, well, that's a stupid question, or you're a jerk, or you're an idiot, or whatever. How are we normalizing that? What are our kids watching us do? And what do they do when they're older to say, have we now taken all guardrails off of humanity? And where does that leave us then? It's a profound question that I think we should spend more time thinking about.
Rekha, I certainly appreciate you spending the time with me and being here. And if people want to learn more about the work that you do or learn more about some of the kind of topics that we brought up, where would you recommend that they go?
There's a number of places. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has resources and information. The American Immigration Council puts out incredible information, state by state even, where you can look at the impact of immigration enforcement and some of these policies by each state. So if you wanted to know the impact of what's happening in Tennessee versus what's happening in New York, you can go on the American Immigration Council's website and look that information up.
Thank you so much for being here today.